Hello, my darlings. It's your Auntie Rose here, and before I begin today's story, I need you to do something for me. Comment below what city you're watching from so I can see how far this message travels. Because what I'm about to share with you is a story that needs to be heard. A story about betrayal so deep it nearly destroyed a family, and about courage that came from the most unexpected place. Pour yourself a cup of tea, settle into your favorite spot, and let me tell you about my dear friend Margaret, a woman who thought she knew her daughter, only to discover that the person she'd raised had become someone she didn't recognize at all. This story still gives me chills when I think about it, and I've known Margaret for over 20 years. Margaret Holloway was 65 years old when her world fell apart. She'd been married to Robert for 42 years, a marriage that everyone in their community held up as an example of true partnership. Robert was a high school principal, respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Margaret had been a nurse for 30 years before retiring, and together they'd built a comfortable life in a charming colonial house in Riverside, Connecticut. They had one daughter, Rebecca, who was 30 years old and married to a man named Tom Brennan. Rebecca worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, a job that required constant travel and kept her busy. Tom was an architect, quieter than Rebecca, more reserved, but always kind and thoughtful. Margaret had always appreciated Tom, though Rebecca sometimes seemed irritated by what she called his overthinking everything. Robert's death came without warning on a Tuesday morning in October. He'd been working in his study preparing a presentation for the school board when Margaret heard a thud. By the time she reached him, he was already gone. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack, so sudden and complete that he probably didn't feel any pain. That knowledge should have been comforting, but Margaret found no comfort anywhere in those first terrible days. Rebecca arrived within hours of Margaret's phone call, and for the first few days, she seemed like the devoted daughter Margaret had always known. She handled the funeral arrangements, contacted relatives, organized the service, and stayed by her mother's side. Margaret was grateful for her daughter's presence, even though she noticed that Rebecca seemed to check her phone constantly, often stepping out to take calls that apparently couldn't wait even during the funeral. Tom attended the funeral, of course, standing quietly beside Rebecca, offering support to Margaret with gentle squeezes of her hand and kind words that seemed genuine. Margaret had always liked her son-in-law, appreciated his calm demeanor, his thoughtfulness. Rebecca had complained about him over the years, saying he was boring, that he didn't have ambition, that he was too content with his modest architectural firm instead of pursuing bigger opportunities. But Margaret had always thought Tom was a good man, steady and reliable, qualities that seemed increasingly rare these days. The funeral was held on a Friday afternoon at St. Catherine's Church, the same church where Margaret and Robert had been married 4 decades earlier. The sanctuary was packed with people whose lives Robert had touched, former students, teachers, parents, friends. Margaret sat in the front pew, feeling disconnected from everything, as if she were watching the service from somewhere far away. It was during the closing prayer, when everyone's heads were bowed, that Tom leaned toward Margaret. She felt him move closer, felt his breath near her ear, and then heard words that made her blood run cold. "Don't sign anything your daughter gives you," he whispered, his voice so low she almost thought she'd imagined it. "Meet me tomorrow at noon at the Riverside Diner on Oak Street. Come alone, your life depends on it." Before Margaret could react, before she could turn to look at him, Tom had moved back to his original position, his head still bowed as if nothing had happened. Margaret's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. What did he mean? Why would he say such a thing? Was he having some kind of breakdown? The rest of the service passed in a blur. Margaret kept stealing glances at Tom, but his expression revealed nothing. He looked like any grieving son-in-law, appropriately solemn, occasionally putting his arm around Rebecca's shoulders when she dabbed at her tears with a tissue. After the service, people gathered at Margaret's house for the traditional reception. Rebecca had organized everything, hiring caterers, arranging flowers, ensuring there was enough food and drink for the dozens of people who came to pay their respects. Margaret moved through her own home like a ghost, accepting condolences, listening to stories about Robert, feeling completely numb. She found herself watching Tom throughout the afternoon. He spent most of his time in corners, speaking quietly with various guests, but every so often she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Worry, fear, something else. Rebecca was in her element, playing the devoted daughter, telling everyone how worried she was about her mother. "She's so fragile right now," Margaret heard her say to a group of Robert's colleagues. "I don't think she should be alone. Tom and I are discussing options for her care." Options for her care? Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She was 65 years old, in perfect health, perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Why would Rebecca be discussing care options? That night, after everyone had left and Rebecca and Tom had gone to the hotel where they were staying, Margaret lay awake in the bed she'd shared with Robert for so many years. The house felt too empty, too quiet, and Tom's whispered words kept echoing in her mind. "Don't sign anything your daughter gives you. Your life depends on it." She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to early morning light streaming through the bedroom curtains. It was Saturday morning, and she had 6 hours until the meeting Tom had requested. 6 hours to decide if she was going to go, if she was going to trust these cryptic warnings from her son-in-law, or if she should tell Rebecca what Tom had said. Rebecca called at 8 o'clock. "Good morning, Mom. How did you sleep?" "Not very well," Margaret admitted. "That's understandable. Listen, Mom, Tom and I would like to come over this morning. There are some things we need to discuss, some papers Dad left that need your signature, estate things that can't wait." Margaret's grip tightened on the phone. Papers that needed her signature. Tom's warning echoed in her mind. "Actually, Rebecca, I'm not feeling very well this morning. Could we do this another day?" There was a pause, and when Rebecca spoke again, her voice had a sharp edge. "Mom, these things can't wait. We're talking about Dad's estate, bank accounts, the house. These things need to be handled immediately. I understand, but I really need some time alone today. Please, Rebecca." Another pause, longer this time. "Fine. But we need to deal with this soon, Mom. Very soon." After Rebecca hung up, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, drinking coffee and thinking. Something was wrong. She could feel it in her bones, that intuition that comes from being alive for 65 years, from raising a child, from nursing thousands of patients and learning to read the signs that something wasn't right. At 11:30, Margaret got into her car and drove to the Riverside Diner. It was a small establishment on the edge of town, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and had red vinyl booths that had been there since the 1970s. Tom was already there, sitting in a booth at the very back, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, his expression grave. Margaret slid into the booth across from him, her heart pounding. "Tom, what's going on? What did you mean yesterday?" Tom looked around the diner, checking to see who else was there. The place was nearly empty, just an elderly couple at the counter and a waitress refilling coffee pots behind the bar. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Margaret," he said quietly, "what I'm about to show you is going to hurt. It's going to hurt more than anything you've ever experienced, possibly more than losing Robert. But you need to know the truth because if you don't, you're going to lose everything." Margaret felt her mouth go dry. "What are you talking about?" Tom pressed a button on the recorder and Rebecca's voice filled the small space between them. Margaret recognized her daughter's voice immediately, that particular tone she used when she was being calculating, when she was planning something. "I need this to happen fast, Jason. The funeral is over and now I need to get her to sign the papers before she has time to think about it." A man's voice, one Margaret didn't recognize, responded. "And you're sure Tom won't be a problem?" Rebecca laughed, a sound that made Margaret's skin crawl. "Tom, please. He's so pathetically devoted to his boring little architecture firm and his stupid principles. He has no idea what's going on. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." "And the plan is still the same?" the man asked. "Get her declared incompetent, get yourself appointed as her guardian, sell everything, and then we're free?" "Exactly. I've already got the medical documents ready. Dr. Sanders will sign whatever I need him to sign. Once we have those papers showing she's experiencing dementia, early Alzheimer's, whatever we want to call it, the court will have to grant me guardianship. Then the house goes on the market, we liquidate her accounts, and we're looking at close to $900,000. Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her daughter. The recording continued. "What about Tom? Won't he contest this?" "I'm divorcing him anyway," Rebecca said casually, as if she were discussing changing her hairstyle. "I've been planning it for over a year. I just needed to wait until Dad died first because I knew there would be money involved. Once we have Mom's money, I file for divorce, Tom gets nothing because of the prenup he stupidly signed, and you and I can finally be together the way we've wanted for the past 2 years. The recording stopped, and Margaret realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face without her even noticing when they'd started. Tom reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm so sorry," he said, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "I'm so sorry you had to hear that." Margaret couldn't speak. She just sat there, her world crumbling around her for the second time in a week. Tom continued, "I found out about the affair 6 months ago. I hired a private investigator because Rebecca was acting so strangely, so distant. The investigator discovered she'd been seeing this man, Jason Crawford, for almost 2 years. He's a financial advisor, someone she met through work." "Why didn't you tell me?" Margaret finally managed to whisper. "Because I didn't know about the rest of it until after Robert died," Tom said. The investigator had put a listening device in Rebecca's car in her purse. "It's how I got this recording. She had this conversation with Jason 2 days after the funeral. That's when I realized it wasn't just about the affair. It was about destroying you, about taking everything you and Robert built." Margaret pulled her hand away and pressed it against her mouth, trying to hold back the sobs that wanted to escape. Her daughter, her only child, the baby she'd nursed, the toddler she'd read to, the teenager she'd worried about, the woman she'd been so proud of. That person was planning to declare her mentally incompetent, to steal everything she had, to leave her with nothing. "There's more," Tom said quietly. "I need you to hear all of it." He pressed play again, and this time it was a different conversation. Rebecca's voice again, but talking to someone else, a woman this time. "So the doctor is definitely on board?" Rebecca asked. "Dr. Sanders will do whatever we need," the woman replied. "I've worked with him before on cases like this. He'll examine your mother, claim she's showing signs of cognitive decline, memory loss, confusion. He'll recommend immediate supervision, possibly institutional care." "How much is this going to cost me?" Rebecca asked. "10,000 up front, another 20 when the guardianship is granted." Rebecca laughed. 30,000 to get control of 900,000, that's good business." The recording stopped again. Tom looked at Margaret with eyes full of sorrow. "The woman she's talking to is a lawyer named Patricia Moore. She specializes in elder law, but apparently she also specializes in helping people steal from their elderly parents." Margaret felt like she was in a nightmare, one of those dreams where you're trying to scream but no sound comes out. "I don't understand. Why would Rebecca do this? We've always taken care of her. We paid for her education, helped her when she needed it." "Why?" Tom shook his head. "I've been asking myself the same question for weeks. The only answer I can come up with is that it's never been enough. Rebecca has always wanted more, always felt like she deserved more. And this Jason, he's encouraged all her worst impulses. He's in debt, gambling problems, and he sees your assets as the solution to all his problems." Margaret wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. "What do I do?" "What can I do?" Tom reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folder. "I've been documenting everything for the past 6 weeks. Every conversation I could record, every text message I could access, every piece of evidence I could find. It's all here, proof of the affair, proof of the conspiracy to defraud you, even some evidence that Rebecca has already started stealing from you." Margaret looked up sharply. "Stealing from me? How? Do you remember about 3 months ago when you lost your credit card and had to get a new one?" Margaret nodded. "Rebecca found it for me. It had fallen behind my dresser." "It didn't fall," Tom said gently. "Rebecca took it. She's been using your credit information to make purchases, small amounts at first, things you wouldn't notice. But over the past 3 months, she's charged over $15,000 to accounts in your name." The hits just kept coming, each revelation worse than the last. Margaret felt like she was drowning, like she couldn't get enough air into her lungs. "I've also been keeping a record of Rebecca's behavior toward you," Tom continued. "The way she talks about you to others, claiming you're confused, that you repeat yourself, that you forget things. She's been building a narrative for months, preparing people to believe that you're losing your mental capacity." Margaret thought back over the past few months, remembering little comments Rebecca had made, times when Rebecca had corrected her in front of others, claiming Margaret had gotten details wrong, that she was misremembering events. At the time, Margaret had doubted herself, wondering if her memory really was failing. Now she realized it had all been calculated, all part of Rebecca's plan. "Tom," Margaret said slowly, "why are you doing this?" Why are you helping me? If Rebecca divorces you, you'll lose everything too. Tom smiled sadly. Margaret, I'm losing everything anyway. My marriage has been a lie for at least 2 years, probably longer. Rebecca doesn't love me, probably never did. She married me because I had a stable career and because you and Robert approved of me. But I've come to realize that I can't save my marriage. What I can do is save you. But Rebecca will hate you for this. She might try to hurt you. She's already hurting me, Tom said. Every day I stay silent is a day I'm complicit in her cruelty. I can't do it anymore, Margaret. I can't stand by and watch her destroy you the way she's destroyed me. Margaret reached across the table and took both of Tom's hands in hers. Thank you, I don't know what else to say. Just thank you. They sat there for a long moment, two people bound by grief and betrayal, finding unexpected strength in each other. So what do we do now? Margaret finally asked. Tom pulled out his phone. Now we call my lawyer. His name is David Chen and he specializes in elder abuse cases. He's expecting to hear from us. He's already reviewed all the evidence I've collected, and he says we have a strong case not just for protecting your assets, but for pressing criminal charges against Rebecca, Jason, and Patricia Moore. Over the next hour, sitting in that small diner booth, Tom and Margaret called David Chen on speakerphone. The lawyer laid out a plan of action that would protect Margaret and expose Rebecca's conspiracy. It would require Margaret to act quickly, to be stronger than she'd ever been, but David assured her that with the evidence Tom had gathered, they would prevail. That afternoon, Margaret followed David's instructions. She went to her bank and put alerts on all her accounts. She met with her own lawyer, a man named Richard Foster who had helped her and Robert with their estate planning, and she executed new documents that specifically excluded Rebecca from any role in her medical or financial decisions. She filed reports with the police about the credit card fraud and the conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. The next morning, Sunday, Rebecca called again. Mom, Tom and I need to come by today. We really need to get those papers signed. What papers, Rebecca? Margaret asked, her voice steady even though her heart was pounding. The estate papers I mentioned, the power of attorney documents, the medical proxy forms. Things that need to be handled now that Dad is gone. Documents that would give you control over my finances and medical decisions? Margaret asked. There was a pause. Mom, it's just standard stuff. Every widow needs these things in place. I see, and is this before or after you have me declared mentally incompetent? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for so long that Margaret thought Rebecca might have hung up. I don't know what you're talking about, Rebecca finally said, but her voice had changed, all pretense of warmth gone. Don't you? Because I have recordings, Rebecca. Recordings of you and Jason planning to defraud me. Recordings of you and Patricia Moore discussing hiring a corrupt doctor to falsely diagnose me with dementia. Recordings of everything. Margaret could hear Rebecca breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Tom, that son of a bitch, he did this. Tom saved me, Margaret said quietly. He saved me from my own daughter. You don't understand, Mom. You don't know what it's like, the pressures I'm under, the debts Jason has. We needed that money. You needed my money? Margaret felt anger rising in her chest, hot and righteous. You needed it so badly that you were willing to have me locked away, declared incompetent, stripped of my dignity and freedom? Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca snapped. I was going to make sure you were taken care of. It's not like I was going to abandon you. You were going to put me in an institution and steal everything your father and I spent 40 years building. How is that not abandonment? I'm still your daughter. You can't do this to me. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. Rebecca, you stopped being my daughter the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. Or at least unable to fight back. What are you going to do? Rebecca's voice was cold now, calculating. Are you going to press charges? Do you really want to put your own daughter in prison? I'm going to protect myself, Margaret said. What happens to you will be the consequence of your own choices. She hung up before Rebecca could respond. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to set the phone down on the kitchen counter. This was real. This was actually happening. She was in a war with her own child and there was no going back from this. The police came that afternoon. Margaret had filed official complaints, and with the evidence Tom had provided, they had enough to investigate. They wanted to interview Margaret, get her statement, understand the full scope of what had been planned. Detective Sarah Morrison was a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She sat at Margaret's kitchen table, taking notes as Margaret told her everything. "Mrs. Holloway," Detective Morrison said when Margaret had finished, "I want you to know that cases like this are more common than you might think. Financial exploitation of the elderly is one of the fastest-growing crimes in this country, and it's often perpetrated by family members. You're doing the right thing by fighting back." "It doesn't feel right," Margaret admitted. "It feels like the worst thing I've ever done." "I understand," Detective Morrison said gently, "but you need to remember that you're not the one who created this situation. Your daughter made choices, criminal choices, and now she has to face the consequences of those choices." Over the next few weeks, the case unfolded like a legal thriller Margaret would never have believed if she weren't living through it. The police interviewed Rebecca, Jason, and Patricia Moore. They seized records from Dr. Sanders, the doctor who had agreed to falsely diagnose Margaret. They gathered evidence of the credit card fraud, the conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud, and the affair that had motivated it all. Tom filed for divorce, citing Rebecca's infidelity and her criminal behavior. He also provided additional evidence he'd been holding back, including photographs of Rebecca and Jason together, hotel receipts, and text messages that left no doubt about the nature and duration of their affair. Rebecca tried to fight back. She hired an expensive attorney and claimed that Margaret was being manipulated by Tom, that Margaret really did have cognitive issues and was being taken advantage of. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and her attorney eventually advised her to take a plea deal. The day of Rebecca's arraignment, Margaret sat in the courtroom with Tom beside her. She watched her daughter stand before the judge, watched her plead guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution of all the money she'd stolen from Margaret. Jason Crawford received a stiffer sentence because of his gambling debts and because he'd been the primary architect of the fraud scheme. He got 18 months in prison. Patricia Moore lost her law license and received 2 years of probation. Dr. Sanders lost his medical license and faced additional sanctions from the state medical board. After the sentencing, Rebecca turned to look at Margaret. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Margaret saw something there that might have been regret, or might have been anger, or might have been nothing at all. Then Rebecca turned away and a court officer led her out of the room. Tom put his arm around Margaret's shoulders. "Are you okay?" Margaret nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was okay or if she'd ever be okay again. "Let's go home." The months that followed were the hardest of Margaret's life, harder even than those first days after Robert's death. At least then she'd had the comfort of good memories, of knowing she'd been loved truly and completely for 42 years. Now every memory of Rebecca was tainted, every photograph a reminder of betrayal. Tom became her unexpected lifeline. His divorce from Rebecca was finalized within 6 months, and through it all, he remained a constant presence in Margaret's life. He helped her sort through Robert's things, a task she'd been avoiding. He had dinner with her twice a week. He called to check on her daily. He became the child Rebecca had chosen not to be. "You know," Margaret said to him one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, "you don't have to keep doing this. You don't owe me anything, Tom. You've already done more than anyone could ask." Tom smiled at her. "Margaret, when I married Rebecca, I wasn't just marrying her, I was joining a family. You and Robert welcomed me, treated me like a son. Just because Rebecca broke that bond doesn't mean I have to break mine with you." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "You're a good man, Tom Brennan. I hope you know that." "I'm just trying to be the person you and Robert always believed I was," he replied quietly. About 8 months after everything came to light, Margaret received a letter from Rebecca. It was the first communication she'd had from her daughter since the sentencing. Margaret held the envelope for a long time before opening it, afraid of what she might find inside. The letter was short, written in Rebecca's familiar handwriting. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I forgive myself. My therapist, court-mandated of course, says I need to take responsibility for what I did, so here it is. I was wrong. I was cruel. I was willing to destroy you for money, and there's no excuse for that. I could try to explain about the pressures I was under, about Jason's influence, about my own dissatisfaction with my life. But in the end, those are just excuses. I made choices, terrible choices, and I have to live with them. I don't know if we'll ever be able to have any kind of relationship again. I understand if the answer is no. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I'm truly, genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you, especially so soon after losing Dad. I heard that Tom has been helping you. I'm glad. He's a better person than I ever gave him credit for. He's a better person than I am. Rebecca Margaret read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. She didn't know what to do with it, how to feel about it. The words sounded sincere, but she'd learned that words were easy. Actions were what mattered, and Rebecca's actions had nearly destroyed her. She showed the letter to Tom the next time she saw him. "What do you think?" she asked. Tom read it carefully, then handed it back to her. "I think she's starting to understand what she's lost. Whether that understanding will lead to real change, I don't know. But it's something. Should I respond?" "That's entirely up to you, Margaret. There's no right or wrong answer here." Margaret thought about it for several days. Finally, she sat down and wrote her own letter. "Rebecca, thank you for your letter and for your apology. I believe that you're sorry, and I'm glad that you're in therapy and working on understanding why you made the choices you made. However, I need you to understand that an apology, while important, doesn't undo the damage that was done. You didn't just try to steal my money. You tried to steal my dignity, my autonomy, my very sense of self. You were willing to have me declared mentally incompetent, to lock me away in an institution, to make me doubt my own mind. That kind of betrayal doesn't heal quickly, if it heals at all. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again. Right now, I can't imagine it. Maybe someday in the future, after you've done the work to truly change, we can try. But that day is not today. I hope you can build a better life, Rebecca. I hope you can become the person I always believed you were, the person you could still be. But I can't be part of that journey. I have to focus on my own healing now. Your mother, Margaret." She mailed the letter and felt a strange sense of relief. She'd said what needed to be said, set the boundaries that needed to be set. Whatever happened next was up to Rebecca. A year after Robert's death, Margaret decided to sell the house. It was too big for one person, and every room held memories that were now complicated and painful. She bought a smaller condo in a community specifically designed for active seniors, a place where she could make new friends and create new memories unburdened by the past. Tom helped her move, packing boxes and carrying furniture, making sure she was settled in her new space. On moving day, as they sat surrounded by boxes in her new living room, eating pizza straight from the box because the plates were packed away somewhere, Margaret looked at this man who had saved her life. "Tom," she said, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "When I redid my will after everything happened, I made some changes. I wanted you to know that I've left you a portion of my estate. Not because I expect anything from you, but because you've been more of a family to me than my own daughter." Tom set down his pizza slice and looked at her seriously. "Margaret, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You gave up everything to tell me the truth. You could have stayed silent, protected yourself, but you chose to protect me instead. That kind of integrity should be rewarded." Tom's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do it for money. I know that. That's exactly why I want to do this." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, eating pizza and watching the sun set through the windows of Margaret's new home. It wasn't the ending Margaret had imagined for her life, but it was an ending she could live with. She'd lost her husband and her daughter, but she'd gained something too. The knowledge that she was stronger than she'd ever believed, and the friendship of a man who had proven that family isn't always about blood, it's about who shows up when things get hard. 2 years after Rebecca's sentencing, Margaret was thriving in her new life. She'd made friends in her condo community, joined a book club, started volunteering at a local hospital. She'd even begun dating a widower named Frank who lived 2 floors below her. Life, she discovered, could be good even after unimaginable betrayal. Tom had also moved on with his life. He'd sold his architecture firm and started a new one with a partner, and business was booming. He'd started dating someone too, a kind woman named Lisa who worked as a therapist. He still visited Margaret regularly, and she'd become close with Lisa as well. One afternoon, as Margaret and Tom sat having coffee at a cafe near her condo, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello, Mom. It's Rebecca." Margaret's hand tightened on the phone. She hadn't heard her daughter's voice in nearly 2 years. "Hello, Rebecca. I know I don't have the right to call you, but I wanted you to know that I've completed my probation. I've been in therapy the whole time, real therapy, not just court mandated. And I've been working on myself, on understanding why I did what I did. Margaret didn't respond, waiting to hear what would come next. I don't expect you to forgive me, Rebecca continued. I don't even expect you to want to see me, but I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did to you, and I understand why you had to protect yourself from me. And I'm sorry, I will be sorry for the rest of my life. Margaret looked at Tom, who was watching her with concern. Rebecca, I appreciate you calling. I'm glad you're working on yourself. Is that Tom with you? Rebecca asked. Yes, I'm glad. He's a good man. I never appreciated that when we were married, but I do now. Tell him I said hello, and tell him I'm sorry for what I put him through too. I will. There was a pause. Mom, do you think? Do you think someday we might be able to have coffee together? Just talk. Margaret closed her eyes. The old Margaret, the one who existed before all of this, would have said yes immediately, would have rushed to rebuild the bridge no matter how badly it had been burned. But she wasn't that Margaret anymore. Maybe someday, she said carefully, but not yet. I'm not ready yet. I understand. Thank you for taking my call. After Rebecca hung up, Margaret sat for a long moment processing the conversation. Are you okay? Tom asked gently. I think so, Margaret replied. She sounded different, more genuine, more humble. People can change, Tom said. Not everyone does, but some people really do the work and change. Do you think I should give her another chance? Tom reached across the table and took her hand. Margaret, only you can answer that question, and there's no rush. If she's really changed, she'll understand that rebuilding trust takes time. Maybe years, maybe forever. Margaret nodded. You're right. I don't have to decide today. As they left the cafe and walked back to Margaret's condo, she thought about the journey she'd been on over the past 2 years. She'd lost so much: her husband, her daughter, the life she'd known. But she'd also gained something precious: the knowledge of her own strength, the ability to set boundaries, and the wisdom to know that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. That evening, Margaret sat on her balcony watching the sunset and thinking about Robert. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his wisdom, his steady presence. But she also felt, for the first time since his death, that she was going to be okay. Not just surviving, but actually thriving. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tom. Dinner next week. Lisa wants to try that new Italian place, and we'd love for you and Frank to join us. Margaret smiled and typed back. We'd love to, thanks for thinking of us. She set down her phone and took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Life, she had learned, was full of surprises, some terrible and some wonderful. You couldn't control which kind you'd get, but you could control how you responded to them. You could choose to be a victim, or you could choose to be a survivor. You could let betrayal define you, or you could let it strengthen you. Margaret had chosen strength. She'd chosen to protect herself, even when it meant fighting against her own daughter. She'd chosen to trust Tom when he offered her the truth, even though it shattered her world. And she'd chosen to build a new life from the ruins of the old one. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret thought about all the women out there who might be facing similar situations, who might be feeling confused and manipulated, who might be doubting their own judgment because the people they trust are telling them they're wrong. To those women, Margaret wanted to say this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone, not even your own children, make you doubt your own mind. Protect yourself, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it means standing alone against people you love. Because in the end, you have to be able to live with yourself. You have to be able to look in the mirror and know that you fought for your own dignity, your own autonomy, your own right to live your life on your own terms. Margaret had fought that fight, and she'd won. Not because she'd destroyed her daughter, but because she'd saved herself. And that, she had learned, was the most important victory of all. Now, my darlings, let me tell you what happened in the years that followed, because this story doesn't end with simple resolution. Life is rarely that neat, and the consequences of betrayal ripple outward in ways we can never fully predict. 3 years after the initial confrontation, Margaret received another call from Rebecca. This time, it was different. Rebecca's voice was steadier, more mature somehow, stripped of the manipulation that had once colored every word. Mom, I know you said you weren't ready before, and I respect that, but I wanted to let you know that I've written a book. It's about what I did to you, about elder financial abuse from the perspective of someone who committed it. My therapist thought it might help other families recognize the warning signs. Margaret was silent for a long moment, processing this information. A book, yes, it's called The Daughter I Shouldn't Have Been. All the proceeds go to organizations that fight elder abuse. I'm not trying to profit from what I did to you. I'm trying to make sure other people don't make the same mistakes I did, and that other parents are protected from people like me. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been the first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. That's a good thing you're doing, Rebecca. I'd like to send you a copy if you're willing to read it. Not because I want your approval, but because I think you deserve to know that I've spent every day since then trying to understand how I became the person who could hurt you that way. Send it, Margaret said quietly. I'll read it. The book arrived a week later, a modest paperback with a simple cover. Margaret sat in her favorite chair by the window, Frank having given her space for this moment, and she began to read. What she found in those pages was raw, painful honesty. Rebecca had laid bare every ugly thought, every rationalization, every step of the conspiracy. She'd written about her resentment toward her parents for having what she perceived as an easier life. She'd written about her entitlement, her belief that she deserved their money simply because she was their daughter. She'd written about how Jason had fed those feelings, had convinced her that taking what she wanted was justified. But she'd also written about the moment everything changed, the moment she'd stood in that courtroom and realized what she'd done. The shame that had consumed her. The therapy sessions where she'd had to face the monster she'd become. The slow, painful process of understanding that love isn't ownership, that parents aren't banks, that family isn't something you can take from, it's something you have to give to. Margaret read the entire book in one sitting, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she called Tom. I just finished Rebecca's book, she said. And, Tom asked gently, I think she might have really changed. I think she's done the work. What do you want to do about that? Margaret looked out the window at the community garden below, where residents were tending their plots, working together to create something beautiful. I think I'm ready to have that coffee with her, just coffee, just talking, nothing more than that yet. Tom was quiet for a moment. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Rebecca reached out to me a few months ago. She apologized to me too for everything she put me through, and I've been having coffee with her occasionally. Not because I've forgiven her completely, but because I wanted to see if the change was real. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to pressure you. Your healing journey is your own and it moves at its own pace. But since you're asking about her now, I wanted you to know that from what I've seen, she's genuinely different. She's working 2 jobs, living simply, going to therapy 3 times a week. She's become active in elder rights organizations. She's trying to make amends not just to you, but to the world. Margaret processed this information. Tom had forgiven Rebecca, or was at least on the path to forgiveness. That meant something, given everything Rebecca had put him through. Will you come with me? Margaret asked. When I meet her, I think I'd feel safer with you there. Of course. Always? They met at a neutral location, a quiet tea shop Margaret had never been to before, so there would be no memories attached to the space. Rebecca arrived first, and Margaret saw her through the window before going in. Her daughter looked different, older somehow, though only 3 years had passed. She wore simple clothes, no expensive jewelry, no designer handbag. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. When Margaret walked in with Tom, Rebecca stood up, but she didn't rush forward to hug her mother. She waited, respecting the distance Margaret needed. Hello, Mom, she said softly. Thank you for coming. Margaret sat down across from her, Tom beside her like a protective guardian. I read your book. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. What did you think? I think it was brave. I think it was honest. I think it shows real understanding of what you did and why it was wrong. It doesn't undo anything, Rebecca said quickly. I know that. Nothing I do will ever undo what I did to you, but I needed you to know that I understand. I really, truly understand. They talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Rebecca told Margaret about her life now, about her jobs as a pharmacy technician and a weekend volunteer coordinator at a nursing home. She told her about the therapy, about the hard work of confronting her own selfishness and sense of entitlement. She told her about the amends she was trying to make, not just to Margaret, but to everyone she'd hurt along the way. Margaret listened, asked questions, shared some of her own journey of healing. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. A small crack in the door that had been sealed shut for 3 years. When they parted, Rebecca didn't ask for another meeting. "I'm here whenever you're ready," she said. "A week from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, I'll wait as long as it takes." Over the next year, Margaret and Rebecca met occasionally, always in public places, always with Tom present. Slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild something that looked like a relationship. It wasn't the same as it had been, it could never be that again, but it was real in a way the old relationship had never been. Margaret learned to set boundaries with her daughter. When Rebecca made a suggestion about Margaret's life, Margaret would say firmly, "Thank you for your input, but I'll make my own decisions about that." And Rebecca would nod and back off, respecting those boundaries in a way she'd never done before. Tom eventually became less necessary as a buffer between them. Margaret and Rebecca could meet alone, could talk without supervision. The conversations were still sometimes awkward, still sometimes painful, but they were honest in a way that felt healing. 4 years after the initial betrayal, Margaret made a decision that shocked everyone who knew the story. She invited Rebecca to Thanksgiving dinner at her condo. It would be a small gathering, just Margaret, Frank, Tom, Lisa, and Rebecca. A chosen family built not on blood alone, but on trust earned through actions. Rebecca arrived with a homemade pie and a card. Inside the card was a handwritten note. "Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving I've changed." The dinner was sometimes awkward, sometimes painful, but also sometimes wonderful. They laughed at Tom's terrible jokes. They shared stories about Robert, keeping his memory alive. They made new memories together, cautiously building a future on the ruins of the past. As Margaret looked around her table that evening at this strange, broken, rebuilt family, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope that people really could change. Hope that forgiveness, real forgiveness, was possible even after the deepest betrayals. Hope that the human spirit was resilient enough to heal even the worst wounds. But she also knew something else, something important that she wanted to share with all of you, my darlings, who have been listening to this long, painful, ultimately hopeful story. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending the betrayal never happened. It doesn't mean putting yourself back in a position to be hurt again. Margaret never gave Rebecca access to her finances. She never signed any documents without having her lawyer review them first. She never stopped being vigilant about protecting herself. Forgiveness, Margaret had learned, was about releasing the anger that was poisoning her own heart. It was about choosing peace over bitterness. But it was also about maintaining boundaries that kept her safe. You could forgive someone and still protect yourself from them. You could love someone and still not trust them completely. Those things weren't contradictions, they were wisdom. 5 years after Tom had played those recordings in the diner, Margaret threw a party to celebrate her 70th birthday. Rebecca was there, but so were all the friends Margaret had made in her new life. People who loved her, supported her, who had helped her rebuild her world after it shattered. Tom gave a toast during the party. "To Margaret," he said, raising his glass, "one of the strongest, bravest women I know. She taught me that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's kind. And that family isn't always about who shares your blood, but about who shows up when you need them most." Everyone raised their glasses, including Rebecca, who had tears streaming down her face. Later that evening, as people were leaving, Rebecca approached her mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Margaret braced herself, old fears rising up. "What is it?" "I met someone, his name is David. He's a good man, a teacher, nothing like Jason. And I told him everything about what I did to you. I showed him the court records, let him read my book, held nothing back. I wanted him to know exactly who I used to be." Margaret waited, unsure where this was going. "He said that the person I used to be isn't the person I am now, that everyone deserves a second chance if they've truly changed, and he asked me to marry him." Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. "What did you say?" "I said I needed to talk to you first, because I don't want to get married without your blessing. I don't need it, I'm an adult and I can make my own choices, but I want it. I want you to meet him, to know him, to feel comfortable that I'm making a good choice this time." Margaret looked at her daughter, this woman who had nearly destroyed her, who had done the hard work of becoming someone different, someone better. "I'd like to meet him," Really? Rebecca's face lit up with hope. Really? Invite him to dinner next week. Let's see if this David is as good as you say he is. Over the next few months, Margaret got to know David. He was indeed a good man, patient and kind, with clear eyes that saw Rebecca's flaws but chose to love her anyway. He knew her history and wasn't frightened by it. In fact, he worked at a high school and used Rebecca's story in his classes when teaching about ethics and consequences. When David asked Margaret for permission to marry Rebecca, he did it with humility and grace. Mrs. Holloway, I know what Rebecca did to you. I know the pain she caused. But I also know the work she's done to change. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise that I'll always treat her with respect, that I'll never manipulate her or encourage her worst impulses. And I can promise that I'll always encourage her to maintain a healthy relationship with you, if that's what you both want. Margaret gave her blessing, and 6 months later she attended Rebecca's wedding. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate affair Rebecca's first wedding had been. This time Rebecca walked herself down the aisle, not asking her mother to give her away because, as she said in her vows, I've spent the past 5 years learning to give myself to someone honestly, without taking from anyone else. Margaret cried during the ceremony, but they were different tears than she'd cried at Rebecca's first wedding. These weren't tears of joy for a daughter she thought she knew. These were tears of hope for a daughter who had been lost and was slowly being found again. As I'm telling you this story now, my darlings, Margaret is 72 years old. Rebecca is 45, married to David for 2 years, and they have a baby on the way. Margaret is cautiously excited about becoming a grandmother, though she's careful about the boundaries she's set regarding money and access to her finances. Rebecca understands and respects those boundaries. Tom is happily married to Lisa, and they have a daughter of their own. Margaret is the child's honorary grandmother, and she treasures that relationship as much as any biological connection. Frank, Margaret's partner, passed away last year from cancer. Rebecca was there through his illness, helping her mother care for him, showing up in ways that the old Rebecca never would have. It was during those hard months that Margaret truly believed her daughter had changed, because actions speak louder than words, and Rebecca's actions showed real love without any expectation of gain. So what's the moral of this story, you might ask? What am I trying to tell you with this long, complicated tale of betrayal and redemption? I think there are several lessons here, my darlings, and different ones will resonate with different people. First, trust your instincts. Tom's instincts told him something was wrong, and instead of ignoring them, he investigated. When he discovered the truth, he chose to act on it, even though it cost him his marriage and his comfortable life. But by acting, he saved Margaret from a fate that would have destroyed her. Second, it's never too late to protect yourself. Margaret was 65 when she discovered the plot against her. She could have felt too old, too tired, too defeated to fight. But she found strength she didn't know she had, and she fought for her right to control her own life. Age doesn't mean you have to accept abuse. Age doesn't mean you forfeit your autonomy. Third, family isn't just about blood. Tom proved that by standing by Margaret when her own daughter was betraying her. The friends Margaret made in her new community proved it by welcoming her and supporting her. Family is about who shows up, who tells you the truth, who protects you when you're vulnerable. Fourth, people can change, but change is a choice they have to make for themselves, and it takes time to prove. Rebecca chose to change. She did the hard work of therapy, of facing her own darkness, of making amends. But that change took years, and Margaret was right to be cautious, to move slowly, to protect herself, while Rebecca proved through consistent actions that the change was real. Fifth, forgiveness is for your own peace, not for the person who hurt you. Margaret forgave Rebecca not because Rebecca deserved it, but because Margaret deserved to live without the poison of constant anger in her heart. But forgiveness didn't mean blind trust. It meant choosing to move forward without being consumed by the past. And finally, the most important lesson, you teach people how to treat you. For too many years, Margaret had been passive, had let Rebecca make decisions, had doubted her own judgment when her daughter questioned it. Once Margaret learned to set boundaries, to say no, to trust her own mind, everything changed. Rebecca had to learn that her mother wasn't someone to be manipulated or controlled, but someone to be respected. My darlings, if you're listening to this story and you're recognizing patterns in your own life, if you have family members who are making you doubt yourself, who are pressuring you to sign documents you don't understand, who are talking about how confused you are or how you need supervision, please hear me. Trust yourself, Seek help from people outside the situation. Talk to a lawyer, talk to a counselor, talk to friends who have your best interests at heart. And if you're someone who has been the Rebecca in this story, if you've manipulated or hurt or stolen from your elderly parents, it's not too late to change. But change isn't just saying sorry, it's doing the work to understand why you did what you did. It's making amends not just with words but with actions. It's respecting boundaries even when they feel unfair. It's proving through years of consistent behavior that you've truly become someone different. This story, like all the stories I share with you, is true in its essentials, though I've changed names and some details to protect the people involved. Margaret is a real woman, Tom is a real man, and Rebecca is a real daughter who nearly destroyed her mother but chose to become someone better. I share these stories not to entertain you, though I hope they do, but to educate you, to warn you, to give you the tools to protect yourself or to change yourself. Because these situations are more common than you might think, and the more we talk about them, the more we shine light on them, the harder it becomes for them to happen in the dark. So, my darlings, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. If this story resonated with you, if it helped you see something in your own life or gave you courage to make a change, comment below and let me know. Tell me what city you're watching from, tell me if you've experienced something similar, tell me if you need help, or if you've found your way through to the other side. And if you know someone who might need to hear this story, someone who might be in Margaret's position, facing manipulation from their own family, please share it with them. Sometimes hearing that we're not alone, that others have faced similar situations and survived, is exactly what we need to find our own strength. Thank you for staying with me through this long story. Thank you for caring enough about these issues to listen. Thank you for being the kind of people who believe that we all deserve to live with dignity, autonomy, and respect, no matter our age. Remember, your Auntie Rose loves you. Be kind to one another, but also be strong for yourselves. Set boundaries, trust your instincts, protect yourself when necessary, and never ever let anyone make you doubt your own mind. Until next time, my darlings. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay true to yourself. This is your Auntie Rose signing off with love and prayers for all of you. If you made it to the end of this story, drop a number 1 in the comments. If this story touched your heart or helped you in some way, please like the video and consider sending a small tip to support these stories. I have many more stories like this on my channel about family, betrayal, redemption, and survival. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of them. I've added 2 more powerful stories on your screen that viewers have loved. Check them out when you're ready for another journey. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. Until we meet again, this is Auntie Rose reminding you that you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more loved than you realize. With all my love, goodbye for now.